Welcome to WW2 Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. In the final, tranquil months of 1941, the Philippine Islands were the pearl of the Orient, a tropical jewel in America's Pacific territories. For the 77 American Army and Navy nurses stationed there, it was a coveted assignment. Life was a blend of professional duty and exotic paradise. Crisp white uniforms against a backdrop of lush greenery. Calm evenings punctuated by the sounds of a distant Manila nightlife and the gentle lapping of the South China Sea. They served in modern, well-equipped hospitals like Sternberg General Hospital, caring for American servicemen and their families. Their concerns were routine: managing wards, assisting in surgeries, and combating the occasional bout of a tropical ailment. The looming war in Europe felt a world away, a distant rumble of thunder on a clear, sunny day. The nurses, a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced young women, had been drawn to this life by a sense of adventure and a call to service. They wrote letters home describing the vibrant culture, the warm climate, and the camaraderie they shared. There was an unspoken belief in the invincibility of the American presence in the Pacific. The formidable naval base at Pearl Harbor was the anchor of their security. The garrisons in the Philippines, a formidable extension of that power. No one could conceive of a force that could challenge this might. The idea that their peaceful, orderly world was balanced on a razor's edge was unthinkable. As they made their rounds, the humid air thick with the scent of plumeria, the greatest danger seemed to be a sudden tropical downpour. They were healers, not warriors, and their posting was a testament to a world at peace. But history was about to violently disagree. This idyllic chapter was a fragile prologue to a story of unimaginable hardship and extraordinary courage, a trial by fire that would forge them into legends. The illusion of peace shattered at dawn on December 8, 1941. Just hours after the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, the skies over the Philippines ripped open. The roar was not thunder, but the drone of hundreds of Japanese bombers and Zero fighters. From their hospital windows, the nurses watched in disbelief as Clark and Nichols fields were turned into raging infernos. The serene tropical landscape was scarred with plumes of black smoke. The war had arrived not with a declaration, but with a terrifying, unannounced violence. Within minutes, their reality was inverted. The quiet, orderly hospital wards became chaotic centers of mass casualty triage. The first wave of victims arrived, men horrifically burned, riddled with shrapnel, their bodies broken by the sheer force of the explosions. The pristine white uniforms of the nurses were quickly stained with blood and grime. The scent of plumeria was replaced by the acrid smell of burnt fuel and antiseptic. All thoughts of a peaceful tour of duty evaporated in the heat of the attack. Their training took over, an automatic response against the tide of chaos. They worked relentlessly, their movements efficient and focused amidst the screams of the wounded and the concussive blasts of bombs still falling nearby. Reconstructed whispers filled the air. Pressure on this wound now. We need more plasma stat. "Just breathe, soldier, look at me, you're going to be okay." They were no longer just nurses. They were a critical line of defense against death itself, the first responders in a war that had just landed on their doorstep. This was their baptism by fire, a brutal transition from peacetime service to frontline combat medicine. The Pacific Paradise had become a war zone, and for these 77 women, a 3-year ordeal of survival had just begun. As American and Filipino forces were pushed back by the relentless Japanese advance, General Douglas MacArthur ordered a strategic retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. It was a desperate gamble, intended to hold out until reinforcements could arrive. For the nurses, this meant abandoning their hospitals and falling back into the jungle. Here, in the dense, malarial wilderness, they would establish two of the largest and most primitive military hospitals in modern history. Hospital Number 1 was set up in the south at Lime, and Hospital Number 2, a sprawling open-air facility, was carved out of the jungle near the Kabkabin River. The conditions were beyond primitive. They were a medical nightmare. Wards were little more than rows of bamboo beds under the jungle canopy, exposed to the elements, insects, and constant enemy air raids. The operating rooms were often crude wooden structures with canvas roofs, where surgeons worked by the light of flashlights during nighttime bombardments. The jungle itself became an enemy. The oppressive humidity bred infection. The surrounding swamps were breeding grounds for mosquitoes carrying malaria, which quickly ravaged both patients and staff. Dysentery and other tropical diseases became as deadly as Japanese bullets. Medical supplies, once plentiful, dwindled at an alarming rate. The nurses were forced to ration everything from quinine to morphine to sterile bandages, which they washed in streams, boiled, and reused. They fought a multi-front war, against catastrophic battle wounds, against rampant disease, and against the crushing lack of resources. The constant drone of Japanese planes overhead was a soundtrack of terror, a reminder that there was no safe place. They learned to distinguish the whistle of falling bombs, diving for cover in ditches alongside their patients, only to rise again, covered in dirt, to continue their work. This was the crucible of Bataan, a trial that stripped away everything but their core duty to heal. Here, in this green hell, they earned their name, the Angels of Bataan. The sprawling jungle hospitals of Bataan were clearly marked with large, painted red crosses, a symbol that, according to the Geneva Convention, should have guaranteed their safety. But in the brutal calculus of the Pacific War, such symbols were often ignored. The Japanese pilots flying overhead either didn't see them or didn't care. Air raids on the hospital compounds became a terrifyingly regular occurrence, a turning point that erased any last vestige of hope for sanctuary. During one such raid on Hospital Number 2, bombs rained down directly on the wards, sending shrapnel tearing through the flimsy structures and the vulnerable men lying within them. The ground shook violently, and the air filled with the screams of the newly wounded and the dying. In this moment of supreme terror, the nurses' professionalism became an act of profound bravery. While others sought shelter, they moved through the chaos. Their voices, calm and commanding, cut through the noise. "Stay down, cover your heads." They would shield patients with their own bodies, dragging men on stretchers to the relative safety of a ravine, all while debris rained down around them. The surgical teams refused to stop, continuing delicate operations by the flickering light of a gas lantern as the world outside exploded. They were performing modern medicine in a medieval setting, under the constant threat of annihilation. The lack of supplies forced them into desperate innovation. They fashioned medical instruments from whatever they could find and sterilized equipment in boiling water over open fires. Each dose of sulfa or quinine was administered with the grim knowledge that the supply was nearly exhausted. This relentless pressure, this combination of frontline danger and medical scarcity, was their new reality. They learned to live with a perpetual knot of fear in their stomachs, yet their hands remained steady, their focus unbroken. It was here they proved that their duty was not just a profession. It was an unbreakable vow, held sacred even when the rules of war were torn to shreds. By April 9, 1942, the breaking point had been reached. After months of starvation, disease, and relentless combat, the exhausted American and Filipino forces on Bataan could fight no more. The peninsula fell, as their male counterparts were rounded up to begin the infamous Bataan Death March. The 77 nurses were among the last to be evacuated under the cover of darkness. They were ferried across the Narrows straight to the island fortress of Corregidor, America's last bastion in the Philippines. Corregidor was a rock, a seemingly impregnable fortress of coastal artillery and concrete bunkers. But its heart was the Malinta Tunnel, a massive underground complex burrowed deep into the island's core. For the nurses, this subterranean labyrinth became their new hospital and their new home. Life in the tunnel was a claustrophobic, deafening existence. The air was thick with the stench of antiseptic, stale sweat, and dust shaken loose by the constant, thunderous impact of Japanese artillery shells. The shelling was ceaseless, a 24-hour-a-day percussion that rattled the very rock around them. Thousands of wounded men lay on cots crammed into the tunnel's laterals, their moans echoing in the confined space. The nurses worked in the dim, artificial light, their world reduced to this crowded, echoing cavern. There was no day or night, only the grueling rhythm of their shifts and the unending barrage from above. They moved like ghosts through the subterranean maze, tending to the ever-growing number of casualties. Sleep was a luxury, snatched in brief moments on a spare cot, only to be jolted awake by a particularly close-hitting shell. Hope for the reinforcements MacArthur had promised was fading, replaced by the grim realization that they were trapped. Corregidor was not a fortress. It was a tomb in the making. For nearly a month, they held on in this underground hell, the last symbol of American resistance, their courage a flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness of defeat. On May 6, 1942, the thunderous artillery barrage finally fell silent. An eerie, unnerving quiet settled over Corregidor. The end had come. General Jonathan Wainwright surrendered the island, and with it, the last American forces in the Philippines. For the nurses in the Malinta Tunnel, the news was met with a stunned, exhausted resignation. Their war of healing was over. A new war for their own survival was about to begin. The moment of capture was surreal. Japanese soldiers, small in stature but radiating an aura of absolute authority, entered the tunnel. The nurses stood in formation, their uniforms tattered and stained, their faces etched with fatigue, but their bearing was defiant and professional. They were now prisoners of war. This event was historically unprecedented. Never before had such a large group of American military women been captured by an enemy force. They were an anomaly to their captors, who initially seemed unsure of what to do with them. After a period of uncertainty on the island, they were transported by boat back to Manila. They watched as Corregidor, the symbol of their last stand, receded into the distance. Their destination was the sprawling campus of the University of Santo Tomas, a place of learning now repurposed into a squalid internment camp for thousands of Allied civilians. The transition was a jarring shock. They marched through the gates, leaving the relative structure of military life behind and entering a chaotic world of civilian imprisonment. They were no longer officers in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. They were simply prisoners stripped of rank and status, identified only by a number. Their weapons, syringes, bandages, and medical knowledge had been taken from them. But as they looked around at the desperate faces of the thousands of men, women, and children already trapped within the walls, they knew their mission was far from over. The Santo Tomas Internment Camp was a city of despair. Over 4,000 civilians from a dozen nations were crammed into a space designed for a fraction of that number. Sanitation was non-existent, food was scarce, and disease was rampant. The Japanese provided minimal oversight, leaving the internees to largely fend for themselves in a slow, grinding battle against starvation and sickness. Into this chaos walked the 77 nurses. Despite being prisoners themselves, weakened and traumatized by their experiences on Bataan and Corregidor, their professional instincts took immediate command. They saw not just a prison but a public health crisis on a catastrophic scale. Led by their chief nurses, Captain Maud Davison and Lieutenant Laura Cobb, they did what they were trained to do. They organized. They established a makeshift camp hospital, commandeering a former university building and transforming it into a functioning medical facility. They had virtually no equipment and no medicine. What little they had to scrounge, trade for, or improvise. They created public health campaigns, teaching internees about boiling water and digging proper latrines to stop the spread of dysentery that was sweeping through the camp. They set up clinics and infirmaries, providing care not just for their fellow American prisoners, but for anyone who needed it. Their white uniforms were long gone, replaced by worn, patched-together clothing. Yet they maintained their military discipline and professional standards. They worked in grueling shifts, their own bodies wasting away from malnutrition, their own minds fighting off despair. They became a symbol of hope and order in a world that had neither. For the thousands of civilian internees, these women were more than just nurses. They were a lifeline. They were the Angels of Bataan transformed into the saviors of Santo Tomas, their compassion and expertise a defiant act of humanity against the inhumanity of their captors. For nearly 3 years, the nurses endured a slow, agonizing descent into starvation. Life in Santo Tomas, and for some who were later moved to the Los Baños camp, was defined by one single, all-consuming obsession: food. The Japanese provided a meager ration of rice, usually weevily and poor quality, and a watery soup made from weeds. The daily calorie intake dropped precipitously, from a barely survivable 1,500 calories to, by late 1944, a catastrophic 700 calories per day, far below the level needed to sustain basic bodily functions. The physical consequences were devastating. The nurses, like all the prisoners, became walking skeletons. They suffered an average weight loss of over 30%, with some women losing nearly half their body weight. Their bodies began to consume themselves. Their hair fell out, their vision blurred, their bones ached. They suffered from the diseases of severe malnutrition, beriberi, which caused painful swelling and heart failure, pellagra, and scurvy. Yet, through this unimaginable physical decay, their spirit of duty remained unbroken. They continued to work in the camp hospital, caring for others who were even worse off. They would often give their own pitifully small rations to sick children or dying patients, a sacrifice that pushed their own bodies closer to the brink. This unbreakable professional dedication was their psychological armor. Focusing on the needs of others gave them a purpose that transcended their own suffering. It kept them from succumbing to the apathy and despair that consumed so many around them. The fact that all 77 of these women survived this 3-year ordeal is nothing short of a miracle. It is a testament not only to their physical toughness, but to their incredible discipline, their support for one another, and their unwavering commitment to the nursing ethos. They created a community of survival, sharing everything they had and holding each other up through the darkest days. They were a band of sisters, bound by a shared trial, who refused to let the darkness extinguish their light. The human cost of their 3-year captivity was etched onto their very bones. The daily struggle was a silent, grinding war fought inside the wire fences of Santo Tomas. It was a war against invisibility, the fear that they had been forgotten by the world outside. Rumors would sweep through the camp like wildfire, rumors of Allied landings, of imminent rescue, only to be extinguished by the grim reality of another day of starvation. The psychological toll was immense. They witnessed death on a daily basis, caring for friends and strangers as their bodies gave out from disease and malnutrition. They fought to maintain their own sanity, to hold onto memories of a life before the war, of family, of simple pleasures like a full meal or a clean bed. The lack of privacy was a constant strain. They lived in overcrowded rooms, their every moment observed. They endured the casual cruelty and rigid regulations of their Japanese guards, a constant reminder of their powerlessness. Yet within this bleak landscape, they cultivated small acts of resistance and humanity. They would organize small concerts, share tattered books, and celebrate holidays with pathetic, makeshift decorations to keep morale alive. Their unity was their greatest weapon. They looked out for one another, pooling their resources and their emotional strength. When one nurse was on the verge of collapse, others would step in, taking her shift, sharing a hidden scrap of food, offering a word of encouragement. This sisterhood was the key to their collective survival. The unprecedented fact that every single one of the 77 nurses made it through the entire ordeal is a statistic that defies probability. For nearly 1,000 days, they walked the tightrope of survival. They bent under the immense pressure, but they never broke. Their survival was not a matter of luck. It was a victory of the human spirit, a testament to their discipline, resilience, and profound bond. By February 1945, hope in Santo Tomas had worn tissue thin. The prisoners were dying in greater numbers each day, and the sound of distant artillery was both a promise and a terror. Then, on the evening of February 3rd, the sound changed. It was a new noise, a deep, mechanical roar that grew louder and louder. It wasn't artillery, it was the sound of engines. Suddenly, the camp erupted. A single American M4 Sherman tank, nicknamed Battalion Basic, crashed through the main gates of the compound. The roar of freedom had arrived. What followed was a scene of pure, delirious pandemonium. Emaciated prisoners, skeletal figures in rags, swarmed the American soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. They wept, they cheered, they touched the tanks as if they were holy relics. The liberators were horrified by what they found. They had expected resistance, not a camp full of walking ghosts. Among the cheering crowds were the nurses. They were gaunt, weighing less than 100 pounds each, their eyes hollowed out by years of starvation. But as the American flag was raised over Santo Tomas, they stood tall. A photograph taken shortly after the liberation became an iconic image of their ordeal and survival. In it they stand together, their faces thin but their spirits luminous. It is the look of people who have stared into the abyss and have come back. Their war was finally over. The liberation was not just an end to their suffering, but a validation of their endurance. They had survived the unsurvivable. In the days that followed, they were given medical care, food, and new uniforms before beginning their long journey home. Their legacy was sealed. They were the Angels of Bataan and Corregidor, the largest group of female POWs in American history, and a powerful symbol of courage and professional devotion in the face of unimaginable adversity. All 77 had gone into captivity, and against all odds, all 77 came home. Thank you for joining WW2 Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.